How many times have you caught yourself scrolling through social media, waiting for that next like or comment to roll in? Or maybe you've replayed a conversation in your head, wondering if you said the right thing to win someone's approval. That nagging need for validation, it's exhausting, isn't it? The truth is, we've all been there. Chasing external approval can feel like running on a treadmill. You're moving, but you're not really getting anywhere. And here's the kicker: the more you seek it, the more it controls you. But what if there was a way to step off that treadmill, to find a deeper kind of confidence that doesn't depend on anyone else's opinion? That's where Stoicism comes in. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius faced pressures that would make our modern struggles pale in comparison, yet he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. That's the essence of Stoic philosophy, a radical shift from seeking approval to cultivating unshakable inner peace. It's not about suppressing emotions or becoming indifferent. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't something others can give or take away. Imagine waking up each day free from the weight of wondering what others think, knowing your sense of purpose comes from within. That's the freedom Stoicism offers. In this video, we're diving into 20 Stoic practices designed to help you break free from the approval trap. These aren't quick fixes or empty affirmations. They're time-tested principles that have guided thinkers, leaders, and everyday people toward genuine self-mastery. Whether it's learning to differentiate between what you can control and what you can't, or reframing criticism as fuel for growth, each approach is a step toward a mindset that doesn't just resist the need for approval, it transcends it. So if you're ready to stop handing over your happiness to other people's opinions, you're in the right place. Let's begin. One of the most transformative tools Stoicism offers is the simple but profound practice of distinguishing between what's within your control and what isn't. The ancient teacher Epictetus put it bluntly: some things are up to us and some are not. Your thoughts, your actions, your values, these belong to you. But other people's opinions, their judgments, even their praise or criticism, those fall squarely in the category of things you can't command. And here's the irony: the more we chase what's outside our control, the more powerless we feel. Think about the last time you anxiously awaited a response to a text, or replayed a meeting in your head, worrying if your boss approved of your idea. That mental energy wasn't just draining, it was spent on something you could never truly dictate. This isn't about giving up or becoming passive. It's about redirecting your effort where it actually makes a difference. Imagine two gardeners. One obsesses over whether the neighbors admire their flowers, while the other focuses solely on watering, pruning, and nurturing the plants. Which one do you think enjoys the process more? Which one grows a garden that thrives regardless of who stops to look? Stoicism teaches us to be that second gardener, to pour our energy into the work itself, not the applause that may or may not follow. When you shift your focus inward, you stop handing strangers the remote control to your self-worth. So the next time you catch yourself seeking validation, pause and ask, is this something I can control? If not, acknowledge it, then let it pass like weather. Your confidence doesn't have to be a democracy where everyone else gets a vote. It can be a quiet, unshakable knowing, built on what you choose to value within yourself. That's the power of the Stoic Dichotomy. It doesn't just free you from approval seeking, it hands you back the reins to your own life. If you've ever felt your mood rise and fall with the opinions of others, there's a Stoic practice that can help you reclaim your equilibrium, the art of self-affirmation. Not the kind of affirmation that's about convincing yourself of something you don't believe, but the kind that roots your worth in something far more reliable than fleeting approval. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, began each day with a simple ritual. He'd sit quietly and remind himself of his purpose, his values, and the kind of person he aspired to be. He wasn't rehearsing a script to impress others. He was grounding himself in what truly mattered. That's the heart of Stoic self-affirmation. It's not about convincing the world you're enough. It's about knowing it so deeply that the world's opinion becomes irrelevant. Think about how often we measure ourselves against external benchmarks, likes on a post, praise from a boss, even the silent judgments we imagine from strangers. Stoicism flips that script. It asks, what if your sense of worth came from living in alignment with your own virtues? Not the virtues society shouts about, but the quiet ones: integrity, courage, kindness, the things you'd respect in yourself even if no one else noticed. Journaling, a practice beloved by Stoics, becomes a powerful tool here. It's not just about recording events, it's about reflecting honestly. Did I act with purpose today? Did I stay true to my principles even when it was inconvenient? That's where real confidence grows, not from a chorus of external validation, but from the private knowledge that you're living by your own code. Here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop needing approval, you often earn more respect. People sense the difference between someone who's performing for applause and someone who's guided by an inner compass. It's like the difference between a tree that bends with every wind and an oak that stands firm, not out of stubbornness, but because its roots run deep. That's the gift of Stoic self-affirmation. It doesn't make you indifferent to others. It frees you to engage with them genuinely, without the desperate energy of someone begging for validation. You start to realize that the most meaningful approval, the kind that actually sustains you, was never outside you to begin with. It was always there, waiting to be claimed. Here's something uncomfortable but true. The more we crave approval, the smaller our world becomes. We tiptoe around conversations, avoid risks, and silence our true opinions, all to stay safely nestled in the warm cocoon of others' good graces. But Stoicism challenges this reflex with a counterintuitive idea. Discomfort isn't just inevitable, it's the very thing that strengthens your independence. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, wrote extensively about voluntary hardship, not as punishment but as training. He'd intentionally wear rough clothing, sleep on the floor, or eat simple meals, not because he had to, but to remind himself, I can endure more than I think, and my happiness doesn't hinge on comfort. Think about public speaking, a fear so common it outranks death for some people. Why? Because standing in front of a crowd forces you to face the possibility of judgment, of disapproval. But here's what happens when you do it anyway. That first shaky speech might feel terrifying, but with each repetition, something shifts. The discomfort doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it changes. You start to realize that the awkward pause, the forgotten line, the laugh that doesn't land, none of these things break you. In fact, they reveal a resilience you didn't know you had. That's the Stoic secret. Growth isn't found in avoiding discomfort, but in walking straight toward it, like a muscle that only strengthens under resistance. So ask yourself, where are you playing it safe to avoid disapproval? Maybe it's staying quiet in meetings to dodge criticism, or nodding along to opinions you don't share. Every time you choose comfort over authenticity, you're handing someone else the keys to your confidence. But what if you leaned into those moments instead? Not recklessly, but with purpose, like Seneca's voluntary hardships. Start small. Voice that unpopular opinion in a low-stakes conversation, wear something that feels too bold for you. Each time you do, you're sending your mind a powerful message. I can handle the discomfort of not being universally liked. And slowly, the need for approval loses its grip. This isn't about becoming indifferent to others. It's about expanding your capacity to stay true to yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, because on the other side of that discomfort is a rare kind of freedom. The freedom to live without constantly editing yourself for an audience that was never meant to dictate your worth. There's a quiet power in doing something purely because it's right, not because it'll earn you applause or guarantee success. The Stoics called this mindset Adiafora, a term that translates roughly to indifference, but not in the way we typically think of it. It's not about apathy or shrugging off life's events. It's about recognizing that while you can control your actions and intentions, the outcome, whether praise, blame, victory, or failure, isn't yours to command. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, put it plainly: what's up to you, your effort; what's not, the outcome. Focus on the first and let go of the second. Consider Cato the Younger, the Roman senator whose unwavering integrity made him a thorn in the side of Julius Caesar. Cato didn't oppose Caesar because it was popular. In fact, it cost him everything. But his defiance wasn't about winning. It was about standing by his principles, even when the tide turned against him. History remembers him not for his victories, but for his unshakable commitment to what he believed was right. That's the essence of Stoic indifference. It's not that outcomes don't matter, but that they matter far less than the integrity of your effort. Think about a goal you're deeply attached to right now. Maybe it's landing a promotion, getting a certain number of followers, or receiving validation from someone specific. Now ask yourself, how much of your peace are you willing to sacrifice for that result? The Stoic approach doesn't tell you to abandon ambition. It simply asks you to redirect your focus from the unpredictable end to the steadfast process. Write the book because the story deserves to be told, not because it might become a bestseller. Speak up in the meeting because your perspective matters, not because you're guaranteed agreement. Detaching from outcomes isn't passive, it's liberating. It's the difference between tying your worth to a finish line you can't control and finding fulfillment in the act of running itself. So here's an experiment. Pick one thing you've been overinvested in: a project, a relationship, a personal milestone, and for just a week, shift your attention entirely to the effort. Not the metrics, not the reactions, just the work. Notice what happens when you stop measuring your worth by the outcome and start finding it in the doing. That's where real resilience begins. Marcus Aurelius often spoke of building an inner citadel, a mental fortress where your true self could retreat, undisturbed by the chaos of external opinions. Picture a castle with thick stone walls. Outside, the noise of criticism, flattery, and judgment rages like a storm, but inside there's stillness. That's the Stoic ideal. It's not about shutting out the world completely, but about creating a space where you decide what gets in and what doesn't. Think of it as the ultimate boundary-setting exercise for your mind. Today, we're surrounded by more distractions than the ancient Stoics could have imagined: endless notifications, the pressure to curate a perfect online persona, the constant hum of comparison. But the principle remains just as relevant. When you scroll through social media, how often do you feel your mood shift based on who liked your post or what someone else achieved? Those reactions are like cracks in your inner citadel, letting in winds you were never meant to feel. Detoxing from these inputs isn't about rejecting modernity. It's about reinforcing your walls so you're not at the mercy of every passing opinion. Here's the practical question: what weakens your focus right now? Is it the habit of checking your phone first thing in the morning, letting strangers' opinions set the tone for your day? Or maybe it's the unspoken competition with colleagues, where your sense of progress hinges on outdoing someone else's achievements. The Stoics would argue that these aren't just distractions, they're invasions. And just as a castle's gatekeeper decides who enters, you have the power to choose what influences your inner world. Building this citadel doesn't require grand gestures. Start small. Designate tech-free hours where you reclaim mental silence. Practice pausing before reacting to criticism. Ask yourself, does this actually matter to my growth, or am I just craving validation? Over time, these choices fortify your resilience. You'll find that the less you let in, the less you need approval to feel steady. Because true confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It's the quiet certainty that no external voice can shake what you've built within. Criticism stings. There's no sugarcoating it, whether it's a snide comment from a coworker or a harsh review that lingers in your mind. The instinct is to either lash back or retreat. But Stoicism offers a third path, treating critics not as enemies but as unwitting mentors. Seneca, the philosopher who advised emperors, had a radical perspective on this. He called critics involuntary teachers, people who, often without realizing it, highlight where we might improve or where our assumptions need questioning. Think about that for a moment. Every piece of feedback, even the poorly delivered kind, contains a hidden curriculum. The key is learning to separate the lesson from the tone it's wrapped in. Picture this: you've just presented a project at work and a colleague interrupts with, "This approach is completely unrealistic." Your chest tightens. The old script might involve defending your idea on the spot or replaying the moment later, stewing in resentment. But the Stoic response starts with a pause. First, ask, is there truth here? Maybe the criticism is exaggerated, but buried in it is a valid concern about feasibility. Second, consider the source. Is this person genuinely invested in the project's success, or are they projecting their own frustrations? Either way, their words aren't about your worth, their data. Detachment doesn't mean ignoring feedback. It means refusing to let someone else's opinion dictate your self-assessment. Now reflect. How could criticism from your past week have served you if you'd approached it this way? That offhand remark about your presentation style, could it reveal a blind spot in how you communicate? The client who rejected your proposal, did their pushback clarify their priorities? Stoicism teaches us to mine criticism for gold while leaving the dirt behind. It's like panning for nuggets. You shake away the sediment to find what's valuable. This mindset shift isn't about becoming a doormat or dismissing your feelings. It's about reclaiming agency. When you stop seeing criticism as a verdict and start treating it as raw material for growth, something unexpected happens. You become harder to unsettle. The critic loses power not because you've tuned them out, but because you've learned to listen without flinching. And that's true confidence, the kind that doesn't crumble when someone else's opinion enters the room. Imagine two paths diverging in front of you. One is well-trodden, lined with nodding heads and approving smiles. The other is quieter, less crowded, marked only by your own footprints. The first path promises immediate validation. Say what they want to hear, laugh at jokes that aren't funny, mute your true opinions to keep the peace. The second offers something far rarer, the quiet dignity of living by your own code, even when it costs you applause. This is the heart of Stoic virtue, what the ancients called arete, a word that transcends mere morality. It's about excellence of character, the kind that doesn't bend to fit the room. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who valued principle over popularity, put it bluntly: if you do anything not in harmony with what you believe, you'll be miserable. Think about that. Every time you swallow your truth to avoid ruffling feathers, every moment you trade authenticity for acceptance, you're not just pleasing others, you're betraying yourself. And that betrayal compounds. It's like building a house on sand. The foundation crumbles because it wasn't yours to begin with. Now contrast that with the weight of a single honest no, the kind that might disappoint in the moment but leaves your integrity intact. That's the power of virtue over validation. Consider a scenario we've all faced. A friend shares gossip you know is unfair, and the group leans in, eager for more. The easy path is to nod along, to laugh uncomfortably, to trade your discomfort for belonging. But the Stoic choice, it might be as simple as saying, "That doesn't sound like the person I know," or shifting the conversation with kindness. Yes, there's risk, the awkward silence, the subtle cooling of camaraderie, but there's also freedom, because when you choose honesty over likability, you're no longer a prisoner of others' moods. Your worth becomes unshakable, anchored in something no whim of opinion can erode. So reflect on this. When have you dimmed your light to make others comfortable? Maybe it was stifling a creative idea because it seemed too bold, or staying silent in the face of an injustice to avoid conflict. Those moments matter. Not because they define you, but because they're opportunities to course correct. The Stoics weren't perfect, they wrestled with these choices too. But their wisdom reminds us that every compromise chips away at your inner citadel, while every act of integrity, no matter how small, reinforces it. Here's the paradox the Stoics understood. The less you need applause, the more authentic your connections become. People may not always remember what you said or did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel respected, not manipulated. Likability is fleeting, but trust, that's the currency of lasting relationships, and it's earned not by echoing others, but by standing firm in what's right, even when no one's clapping. There's a leather-bound journal in the British Museum, its pages filled with the private musings of a man who ruled an empire. Marcus Aurelius wrote these words to himself: "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do and say and think. At first glance, it might sound morbid, this Stoic practice of remembering death, known as Memento Mori. But look closer and you'll find something startlingly liberating. When you confront life's brevity head-on, the petty chase for approval begins to feel like a waste of precious time. Think about how often we delay our most authentic selves, waiting for some imaginary future when conditions will be perfect, when we'll finally have the courage to speak up, to create, to live by our own standards. But what if that day never comes? The Stoics understood this urgency. They didn't dwell on death to incite fear, but to ignite clarity. Imagine standing at your own funeral, listening to the eulogies. Would you want them filled with hollow praise about how well you pleased others? Or would you hope they spoke of the ideas you dared to share, the principles you refused to compromise, the unique imprint only you could leave? Now consider today's version of this anxiety, the obsession with legacy. We curate social media profiles like virtual tombstones, agonizing over how we'll be remembered. But here's the twist. The more we sculpt our image for posterity, the less we actually live. The ancient Stoics would argue that true legacy isn't crafted in the minds of others. It's forged in the integrity of your daily actions. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations for publication. He wrote them as reminders to himself, and yet 2 millennia later, we're still discussing them, not because he sought immortality, but because he focused on living deeply in the time he had. So here's a question to shake you awake. What would you create, say, or become if you weren't concerned with anyone's opinion? Not in some distant future, but today. Maybe it's that unconventional project you've been shelving for being too niche, or the difficult conversation you've avoided to keep the peace. Mortality awareness doesn't demand grand gestures. It whispers that the most radical act might be refusing to edit yourself for an audience that doesn't hold your values. When you stop performing for spectators, real or imagined, you reclaim the one thing no one can take from you, a life that's unmistakably your own. This isn't about recklessness, it's about reverence. The clock is ticking, yes, but that's not a threat. It's an invitation. Every moment spent worrying over whether you're liked is a moment stolen from discovering what you're truly capable of. The Stoic practice of Memento Mori doesn't diminish life, it distills it. Like a craftsman who works carefully knowing materials are limited, you begin to treat time as the precious resource it is too valuable to squander on seeking permission to exist. What if every setback, every rejection, every twist you never saw coming wasn't an obstacle but part of the blueprint for a life you couldn't have designed better yourself? That's the heart of Amor Fati, the Stoic practice of loving one's fate. Friedrich Nietzsche, though not a Stoic himself, captured it perfectly. My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. It's a radical embrace of life as it unfolds, not as you wish it would. Imagine standing at a crossroads where every path, even the one that feels like a detour, is the right one because it's the one you're on. That's the freedom this mindset offers. Think about a rejection that stung at the time, a job you didn't get, a relationship that ended, a plan that fell apart. Now fast forward, did that no steer you toward something unexpected? Maybe the job you missed would have trapped you in a role that drained you, while the rejection forced you to pivot toward work that lit you up. Or perhaps the heartbreak taught you boundaries you now cherish. The Stoics didn't just tolerate these twists, they trained themselves to see them as necessary brushstrokes in a larger canvas. Epictetus, born into slavery, could have raged against his fate. Instead, he transformed it into wisdom, teaching that difficulty shows what men are, that our struggles aren't interruptions to our story but the very things that shape its depth. Here's the practice. Next time life veers off script, pause and ask, how might this be a gift in disguise, not as empty optimism, but as a genuine excavation for meaning? The client who turned you down, did they free you to work with someone who truly values your vision? The illness that slowed you, did it reveal strengths or priorities you'd overlooked? This isn't about denying pain, it's about refusing to let pain have the final say. Like a sculptor who doesn't fight the grain of the wood but works with it to reveal hidden beauty, Amor Fati invites you to stop resisting your raw materials and start creating with them. Consider the Japanese art of Kinsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold not to hide the cracks, but to highlight them as part of the object's history. Your life's fractures aren't flaws to conceal, they're proof of what you've weathered and rebuilt. When you stop fighting fate and start collaborating with it, something shifts. The need for external validation loosens its grip, because you're no longer measuring your life against someone else's timeline or expectations. You're too busy falling in love with the imperfect, unpredictable masterpiece that's yours alone. You're about to walk into a room where everyone's staring, some with skepticism, others with outright disdain. Your hands feel clammy, your throat tightens. Now imagine this: instead of panicking, you're calm. Not because the crowd's reaction changed, but because you've already lived this moment 100 times in your mind. This is premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of negative visualization, and it might be the most counterintuitive tool for dismantling approval anxiety. Seneca, who faced exile and political scorn, wrote extensively about this. He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand. In other words, fear loses its grip when you stop running from what terrifies you and start examining it under the light. Picture a musician terrified of forgetting the lyrics on stage. They could spend weeks agonizing over the humiliation, or they could sit quietly and visualize it happening: the awkward silence, the flushed cheeks, the scattered applause. At first, it feels unbearable, but with each mental rehearsal, something shifts. The scenario stops being a monster under the bed and becomes just another possibility, one they've already survived in their imagination. That's the alchemy of this practice. By repeatedly facing the worst-case judgment in your mind, you drain its power to shock you in reality. Now apply this to your own life. What judgment are you catastrophizing right now? Maybe it's the fear of being labeled awkward if you speak up in a meeting, or selfish if you set a boundary. Try this exercise. Write down the exact scenario you dread, then sit with it for 5 minutes. Imagine the whispers, the sideways glances, the rejection not as a fleeting thought, but in vivid detail. Here's what you'll likely discover. The anticipation is almost always worse than the event itself. And when you realize you can endure even the outcome you fear most, a quiet confidence emerges. You stop avoiding conversations or opportunities just to sidestep potential disapproval. But there's a crucial distinction here. This isn't about expecting the worst. It's about immunizing yourself against the fear of it. Think of it like a vaccine, a small, controlled dose of the very thing that scares you, building resilience without the full-blown experience. Seneca did this daily, contemplating not just external criticisms but personal losses and setbacks. By doing so, he wasn't preparing for life to go wrong. He was ensuring that no outcome could derail his peace. So the next time you catch yourself hesitating because someone might disapprove, pause and ask, what's the story I'm telling myself about their judgment? Then flip the script, visualize it fully, the criticism, the awkwardness, even the ridicule, and watch as your mind begins to untangle the fear from the facts. Because when you stop running from shadows, you'll find they were never as solid as they seemed. Society hands us a report card every day, likes, promotions, bank balances, as if these numbers could measure a life well lived. But the Stoics rejected this borrowed scoreboard. Epictetus, the philosopher who transformed his enslavement into wisdom, introduced a radical alternative: role ethics. The idea wasn't to meet external benchmarks, but to ask, what does it mean to excel in my roles as a friend, a creator, a human being? Imagine two runners. One obsesses over beating the person next to them, while the other focuses solely on surpassing their personal best. The first is trapped in a race they didn't choose. The second is free to define what winning looks like. That's the power of self-defined metrics. Take social media as a modern example. The default measurement is followers, engagement, viral moments. But what if your metric shifted? What if success meant creating work that challenged you, that aligned with your values regardless of its reach? Or consider career paths. Society often equates success with titles and salaries, but Stoicism invites you to dig deeper. Is your current role allowing you to grow in patience, integrity, or mastery? These aren't abstract questions. They're practical tools to reclaim your compass. When you stop grading yourself on someone else's rubric, you start noticing subtler, more meaningful victories. The quiet pride of keeping your word when no one's watching. The courage to admit a mistake instead of saving face. Here's the litmus test. When you're lying awake at night replaying the day, what's the tape measuring? Is it the applause you didn't receive or the integrity you didn't compromise? The Stoics argued that borrowing society's standards is like wearing another person's shoes. They'll never fit quite right, and you'll always walk with a limp. But when you define your own metrics, something shifts. Criticism stings less because it's no longer striking at your core worth. Praise feels nice but unnecessary, like sprinkles on a cake that's already sweet enough. So try this exercise. Grab paper and divide it into 2 columns. On one side, list the metrics society has handed you: job titles, possessions, superficial markers of making it. On the other, write what excellence looks like in your roles. Not the roles others have scripted for you, but the ones you genuinely value: mentor, artist, neighbor, lifelong learner. The gap between these columns reveals where you've been outsourcing your self-assessment. Closing that gap doesn't mean rejecting external success. It means ensuring those wins are byproducts of your inner standards, not the other way around. Because the ultimate freedom isn't achieving more, it's caring less about the achievements that never truly mattered to you. There's an invisible currency we trade in daily our words. Not just what we say, but how often we say it, how loudly, how urgently. In an age of oversharing, where every thought gets broadcast and every minor victory demands a spotlight, Stoicism offers a radical alternative: the power of silence. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who could have commanded any audience, wrote in his private journal, "You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you." He wasn't just talking about hardships, he was revealing a deeper truth about discretion. When you constantly verbalize your plans, your struggles, even your virtues, you're not just communicating, you're seeking validation through sound waves. Think about the last time you shared something purely out of habit. Maybe it was venting about a bad day to 5 different group chats, or posting a gym selfie, not to celebrate progress but to fish for compliments. These moments reveal a subtle trap. The more we narrate our lives for applause, the more we outsource our sense of worth to whoever's listening. The Stoics practiced something different: strategic silence. Not as repression, but as a filter. Before speaking, they'd ask, is this necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? If the answer to any was no, the words stayed unspoken. This wasn't about hiding, it was about preserving their inner clarity from the static of unnecessary approval seeking. Consider how often we dilute our power by explaining ourselves prematurely. That creative project you keep discussing instead of completing. Each time you share half-formed ideas, you're trading the satisfaction of execution for the cheap dopamine of likes. Or the heated debate where you rehearsed your comeback 10 times, not to clarify your point, but to win observers' approval. Stoic silence cuts through this noise. It's the difference between a river that rushes loudly over rocks and a deep well, still, but infinitely more sustaining. So here's a challenge. For one day, notice every impulse to share something purely for external validation. The meal you're about to photograph, not because it's meaningful, but because it's photogenic. The complaint you're itching to voice just to hear someone say, "You're right." Then pause, ask yourself, if no one ever knew about this, would it still matter to me? That gap between action and audience, that's where real confidence grows. Because when you stop performing for invisible judges, you start living for the only audience that truly counts, the person you see in the mirror each morning. Marcus put it best: waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one. No hashtags, no announcements, just the quiet work of becoming. That's the paradox of Stoic silence. It speaks volumes without saying a word. History remembers Socrates not for his follower count or viral moments, but for the quiet courage of sipping hemlock rather than betraying his principles. In an Athenian culture obsessed with popularity and persuasion, he chose truth even when it cost him everything. Fast forward to today, where influencers measure worth in likes and algorithms reward conformity, and you'll see why Stoicism's emphasis on role models matters more than ever. It's not about idolizing figures from the past, but recognizing that self-assurance grows when we surround ourselves, even metaphorically, with those who valued integrity over applause. Take Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who served as advisor to Emperor Nero. Imagine the pressure of that role, the temptation to flatter, to stay silent in the face of tyranny to preserve his position. Yet his letters reveal a man constantly wrestling with how to speak truth without self-destructing. He wasn't perfect, he made compromises, but his writings show us something profound. Mentorship isn't about finding flawless heroes, but learning from those who struggled with the same tensions we face today. That's the gift of studying historical figures. They become mirrors for our own dilemmas, proving that the choice between principle and popularity isn't new. Now contrast this with modern influencer culture, where authenticity is often performative, a branded persona designed to attract followers. The Stoics would ask, is this person living their values or selling them? There's nothing wrong with sharing ideas widely, but when metrics dictate content, the line between message and merchandise blurs. Cato the Younger, who wore simple tunics in an era of Roman excess, wouldn't care if his frugality trended on social media. His focus was alignment, acting in ways that matched his beliefs, regardless of who noticed. So how do we apply this today? Start by curating your intellectual environment like you'd curate a library. Whose voices dominate your feed? People who challenge you to grow, or those who merely entertain? Mentors don't need to be famous. They might be the coworker who speaks up ethically in meetings, or the relative who lives simply but richly. Their examples become anchors, steadying you when the currents of comparison try to pull you under. Pause and reflect, whose integrity stirs something in you. Maybe it's Marcus Aurelius writing philosophical reflections by candlelight while ruling an empire, or the teacher in your life who prioritized students' growth over test scores. Their stories remind us that approval fades but character echoes across time. When you feel the tug of external validation, ask, what would my role models do in this situation? Not to imitate them blindly, but to borrow their courage until your own grows stronger. The goal isn't to reject modern voices wholesale. It's to balance them with those who remind us of deeper measures of worth. Because the more you immerse yourself in stories of principled lives, the less you'll crave the hollow currency of likes. You'll start to crave something far more sustaining, the quiet satisfaction of knowing your choices align with who you truly aspire to be. Perfection is an exhausting performance, one where the stage lights never dim and the audience never leaves. Seneca saw this clearly when he wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." What he meant was that our terror of slipping up, of being seen as less than flawless, often torments us more than the actual mistakes we fear. Stoicism doesn't ask us to abandon excellence, it asks us to redefine it. Not as a spotless facade, but as the courage to show up authentically, flaws and all. Think about the last time you agonized over a typo in an email, or rehearsed a simple request 10 times to avoid sounding stupid. That's not diligence, it's slavery to an impossible standard. Consider the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, the beauty in imperfection, like a cracked teacup repaired with gold. Stoic realism shares this wisdom. When Seneca spoke of accepting human flaws, he wasn't endorsing mediocrity. He was highlighting the liberation in admitting we're works in progress. Imagine a pianist so afraid of wrong notes that they never play freely. Their technique might be impeccable, but the music lacks soul. Now apply that to your life. Where are you stifling your humanity to maintain an illusion of flawlessness? That carefully curated Instagram grid, the rehearsed laughter at parties, the reluctance to admit, "I don't know," these aren't signs of strength, they're cages. Here's a thought experiment. Recall a public mistake you once dreaded. Maybe it was botching a presentation or spilling coffee at a meeting. Now fast forward. Did the world end? More likely, people barely remembered it by lunch. What lingered wasn't their judgment, but your own self-reproach. Stoicism teaches us to reframe these moments as humility lessons. The colleague who trips on stage becomes relatable. The leader who admits oversight earns trust. Imperfection isn't weakness, it's the glue of genuine connection. So ask yourself, what perfect image exhausts you? Is it the flawless parent, the unflappable professional, the eternally poised friend? Beneath that facade is a simple truth. No one resonates with perfection. They resonate with the struggle, the recovery, the quiet determination to keep growing. Seneca put it best, no tree becomes rooted and sturdy unless many winds assail it. Every gust that shakes you, every misstep, every moment of vulnerability isn't evidence of failure. It's proof you're alive, learning, and infinitely human. And that's the most relatable thing of all. Envy is approval seeking in disguise, the quiet whisper that says, "If only I had what they have, then I'd finally be enough." Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, confessed this struggle in his private writings. When you lose your temper or even feel irritated, remember that human life is very short. Soon we'll all be laid out side by side. At first glance it sounds morbid, but there's liberation in his words. He's exposing envy's absurdity. Why waste your limited days measuring yourself against others when, in the end, none of those comparisons will matter? Consider the modern version of this trap, the endless scroll. You open your phone to check the weather, and suddenly you're knee-deep in someone else's highlight reel, their promotion, their vacation, their seemingly perfect kitchen. Each swipe plants a seed of lack, as if their abundance somehow diminishes yours. But here's what Stoics understood long before algorithms: envy isn't about them. It's about you, your unmet expectations, your unchecked desires. Seneca called it admiring what belongs to others while neglecting your own possessions. That colleague's raise doesn't make your skills less valuable. That influencer's curated life doesn't erase your real, messy, beautiful moments. Now, recall a moment this week when comparison stole your joy. Maybe it was a friend's achievement that left you feeling behind, or a stranger's post that made your ordinary Tuesday seem inadequate. Sit with that feeling for a second. Beneath it, what were you truly craving? Validation, security, proof that you're on the right track? Marcus would urge you to dig deeper. Look within. Within is the fountain of good, always ready to flow if you keep digging. Envy isn't a sin, it's a signal. It shows you where you've handed your self-worth over to external benchmarks instead of cultivating your own. Here's the practice. Next time you catch yourself in the comparison spiral, pause and name what you're actually longing for. Is it really their designer bag or the feeling of being enough that you've tied to it? Then flip the script. Instead of thinking, "They have what I lack," try, "What do I already have that they might envy?" Not to fuel smugness, but to restore perspective. The Stoics weren't immune to envy. They were just ruthlessly honest about its roots. When you stop seeing life as a competition and start treating it as your own unique curriculum, you reclaim the joy that comparison leeches away. Because here's the truth no algorithm will show you. The person you're comparing yourself to is likely comparing themselves to someone else in a cycle as old as humanity. The only way out is to step off the treadmill and ask, what if enough wasn't something to achieve, but something to remember? That's the Stoic secret to contentment, not having everything, but wanting what you already do. Epictetus had a radical suggestion for his students. If you want to be brave, act as if you are brave, and you will become so. At first glance, it sounds like empty posturing, the ancient version of fake it till you make it. But there's profound neuroscience behind this Stoic hack. When you adopt the posture, speech, and actions of the person you aspire to be, your brain begins rewiring itself to match. Think of it as mental dress rehearsal, except the costume doesn't just change how others see you. It changes how you see yourself. Picture this. You're in a team meeting, heart pounding, convinced your idea isn't smart enough to share. The old script might be staying silent, nodding along while your insight goes unspoken. But the Stoic approach, you sit up straight, speak clearly, and contribute as if you already belong there, not arrogantly but with quiet assurance. Here's the magic: no one can see your doubt unless you broadcast it. And with each repetition, the gap between acting confident and feeling it narrows. Marcus Aurelius did this daily, reminding himself to stand tall before entering Rome's Senate, even when political storms raged. He wasn't deceiving anyone. He was training his mind through deliberate action. Now consider where this could transform your week. Maybe it's walking into a networking event as if you're genuinely curious about others, not anxiously scanning for exits. Or offering feedback to a superior with the tone of someone whose perspective matters because it does. The key isn't pretending to be someone you're not. It's accessing the version of yourself that exists beneath the layers of self-doubt. Like an actor embodying a role until it feels natural, you're not faking, you're revealing. Try this experiment today. Pick one situation where you typically shrink and consciously adopt the body language and speech patterns of your most self-assured friend or mentor. Notice how shifting your physicality, uncrossing arms, making eye contact, slowing your speech alters not just others' reactions, but your inner monologue. Epictetus knew what modern science now confirms. Behavior shapes belief far more than we realize. Every time you choose action over hesitation, you're not just performing confidence, you're building it brick by brick until the facade becomes foundation. What makes this Stoic practice timeless is its honesty. It doesn't promise instant transformation or deny the discomfort. It simply asks, what would the person you're becoming do in this moment? Then, remarkably, invites you to do exactly that, not later when you feel ready, but now, precisely because you don't. That's the alchemy of as if. You're not waiting for permission to grow, you're growing through the act itself. Modern life runs on false urgency, the buzzing phone, the inbox that never empties, the unspoken pressure to respond immediately as if every request carried equal weight. But the Stoics recognized this frenzy for what it truly is, not productivity, but people-pleasing in disguise. Marcus Aurelius, who governed an empire amid constant demands, wrote, "No one can rush wisdom. It comes at its own pace." That simple observation cuts to the heart of reactive living. When we jump at every ping or scramble to accommodate others' timelines, we're not being efficient, we're outsourcing our priorities to whoever shouts loudest. Picture this scenario: your coworker slides into your DMs with urgent "need your input in the next 10 minutes. Your stomach knots as you drop your own work to respond. But later, you discover their emergency was simply poor planning on their part. This isn't just about boundaries, it's about recognizing how often we mistake urgency for importance. Stoic patience isn't passive, it's the deliberate act of pausing to ask, is this truly my fire to put out? The ancient philosophers would spot our modern hustle culture as a form of slavery, not to chains, but to the illusion that speed equals worth. Now examine your own impulses. How many yeses have you blurted out from sheer reflex, agreeing to meetings, favors, or commitments not because they aligned with your goals, but because you feared disappointing someone? That's the approval-seeking trap in action. Seneca observed, "Life is long if you know how to use it." He wasn't suggesting immortality. He was highlighting how reactive people squander their most finite resource, time, by treating every demand as equal. The Stoic alternative: cultivate the pause. When faced with a pressured request, borrow Marcus's mantra, "This too shall pass," not as avoidance, but as a filter to separate genuine priorities from social anxiety masquerading as obligation. Here's the revealing question: what if your haste wasn't about efficiency at all, but about an unexamined fear of being seen as uncooperative or slow? That's the crux. Every unnecessary rush is a tiny surrender, a concession that others' perceptions matter more than your peace. Try this experiment for one day. Add a 3-minute buffer before responding to any non-life-threatening request. Watch how many emergencies resolve themselves without your intervention. Like a gardener who refuses to yank seedlings upward to hasten growth, you'll discover that most things unfold perfectly well, often better, when released from artificial urgency. Because here's the paradox the Stoics uncovered centuries ago. Those who refuse to be rushed often command more respect than those constantly in motion. Not because they're indifferent, but because their calm signals discernment. When you stop equating speed with value, you reclaim something precious, the right to move at the pace of your own principles. And that's when true productivity begins. There's a peculiar kind of clarity that only arrives when the world's noise fades, when you're left alone with nothing but your own thoughts. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, called solitude the school of self-revelation. In his letters, he described retreating to his country estate not to escape life, but to confront himself without distraction. You must withdraw into yourself as much as possible, he wrote. Associate with people who can improve you, welcome those you can improve. The process is mutual. But first, he insisted, you must learn to sit with the one person you can never avoid, yourself. Think about how rare true solitude has become in our hyper-connected age. Even when we're physically alone, we're rarely undistracted scrolling, streaming, or filling silence with podcasts, as if afraid of what might surface in the quiet. The Stoics would recognize this as a form of avoidance. Digital detoxes aren't just about reducing screen time. They're modern iterations of Seneca's retreat's opportunities to strip away the layers of performance and remember who you are when no one's watching. Imagine deleting social media for a week, not as deprivation, but as an excavation. What habits, worries, or long-forgotten dreams rise to the surface when you're not drowning them out with notifications? Consider the last time you were truly alone with your thoughts. No music, no podcasts, no background noise. Did discomfort creep in? That restlessness is telling. Seneca observed that people who dread solitude are often fleeing from self-confrontation. It's easier to curate an online persona or lose yourself in others' drama than to face the gap between who you are and who you aspire to be. But here's the paradox, that discomfort is where growth begins. Like a muddy pond left undisturbed, your mind needs stillness for the sediment to settle and the water to clear. So here's a challenge. Carve out 20 minutes today, no phone, no distractions, and ask Seneca's question. What truth emerges in your quiet moments, not as an exercise in self-judgment, but as an act of curiosity? You might notice anxieties you've been suppressing, creative impulses you've sidelined, or even simple joys you've overlooked in the rush to perform. The Stoics didn't seek solitude to hide from the world, but to return to it with renewed focus. Because when you stop outsourcing your identity to likes and algorithms, you reclaim something priceless, the unedited version of yourself. And that's the only foundation sturdy enough to build a life that doesn't crumble under others' expectations. Democritus, the ancient philosopher known as the Laughing One, had a peculiar habit. He found human vanity so absurd, he'd burst into laughter in the middle of the marketplace. While others scrambled for status and approval, he saw right through the charade, recognizing how ridiculous it all looked from a cosmic perspective. The Stoics borrowed this irreverent wisdom not to mock others, but to disarm their own egos with humor. Imagine tripping in public, your face burning with embarrassment. What if, instead of replaying the moment in shame, you saw it as life's way of reminding you not to take yourself too seriously? That's the power of Stoic laughter. It shrinks our social fears down to size. Consider the last time you agonized over a minor slip. Maybe you mispronounced a word during a presentation or spilled coffee on your shirt before an important meeting. In the moment, it felt catastrophic, as if everyone's opinion of you hinged on that one flaw. But here's what the laughing philosopher would point out. Most people are too preoccupied with their own faux pas to remember yours. Marcus Aurelius, despite his imperial stature, practiced this humility daily. He'd visualize the grand funerals of emperors before him, all their power and prestige reduced to ashes, just to chuckle at how fleeting human vanity truly is. There's a liberating neuroscience behind this approach. When you laugh at your own stumbles, you activate the brain's reward system while simultaneously dialing down the amygdala's panic response. It's like giving yourself a mental shrug, acknowledging the stumble without letting it define you. Think of the most charismatic people you know. Chances are, they're not the ones who never err. They're the ones who handle mishaps with a quick wink or self-deprecating joke. That's Stoic humor in action, not denying reality, but reframing it so the sting of embarrassment loses its teeth. Try this exercise. Recall an awkward moment that once haunted you. Perhaps that time you called your boss by the wrong name or waved enthusiastically at a stranger who wasn't actually greeting you. Now picture it as a scene in a sitcom. How would a laugh track change your perception? The Stoics weren't suggesting we become court jesters. They were reminding us that life's hiccups aren't tragedies, they're plot twists in a much grander, often absurd comedy. When you stop seeing social blunders as threats and start viewing them as material for your own private stand-up routine, something shifts. The need for approval loosens its grip because you've become both the actor and the amused audience of your human imperfections. Here's the beautiful irony: the less seriously you take yourself, the more others genuinely enjoy your presence, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Democritus didn't laugh at people, he laughed with them at the shared folly of pretending we're anything more than beautifully flawed works in progress. So the next time your ego takes a hit, channel the laughing philosopher. Find the humor in the stumble, the slip, the social misstep. After all, if life's a stage, why not enjoy the blooper reel? There's a peculiar kind of freedom that comes when you help someone without anyone knowing it was you. No social media posts, no subtle hints dropped in conversation, just the quiet satisfaction of having made a difference. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling the known world, wrote that true fulfillment comes not from being thanked, but from doing what you were born to do. For him, service wasn't about earning goodwill or polishing his reputation. It was as natural as a tree bearing fruit. That's the Stoic distinction between altruism and approval seeking. One replenishes you while the other drains you. Think about the last time you donated to a cause. Did you feel a pang of disappointment when no one acknowledged it publicly? That's the shadow of approval creeping in. Now contrast that with the volunteer who shows up at the soup kitchen every week, not for the community hero accolades, but because the work itself aligns with their values. There's a lightness to their giving, no strings attached, no mental ledger keeping track of who owes them gratitude. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics intuited. Acts of kindness release oxytocin, the so-called helper's high, but only when the giving is genuine. When recognition becomes the goal, the same actions can leave us feeling emptier than before. It's like the difference between feeding stray cats because you can't bear their hunger and doing it solely for the Instagram likes. Both might fill bellies, but only one nourishes the soul. Consider this thought experiment. If you anonymously paid a stranger's medical bill or left groceries on a struggling neighbor's porch, would the act lose its meaning if no one ever discovered it was you? The Stoics would argue it gains meaning because the purity of your intention is untarnished by external validation. Seneca described such moments as virtue's whisper, where the only audience that matters is your own conscience. That's why Marcus kept his philanthropy private, why Epictetus taught that true wealth is measured not by what you possess, but by what you give away without fanfare. So here's a challenge. Recall the last time you helped someone without keeping score. Maybe it was letting a stressed coworker take credit for your idea, or listening to a friend vent without turning the conversation back to your own struggles. Those unrecorded moments are where character quietly solidifies, because when you detach service from applause, you discover something remarkable. The act itself becomes the reward. No one needs to clap for the sun to rise, and no one needs to praise you to make your kindness matter. Like gravity, it works just as well in silence. So where does this leave us after exploring these 20 Stoic approaches? Not with a rigid set of rules, but with something far more valuable, a toolkit for inner freedom. Each practice, from distinguishing what's in your control to laughing at life's absurdities, isn't about suppressing your humanity. It's about reorienting your attention from the fleeting opinions of others to the enduring strength within. Stoicism, at its core, is an invitation to stop outsourcing your worth and start owning it fully. Think of these approaches like a painter's palette. You wouldn't use every color in one stroke, but having them available lets you create the right shade for each moment. Some days, you'll need the stark clarity of the dichotomy of control. Others might call for the gentle humor of Democritus or the quiet resolve of Seneca's voluntary hardships. The goal isn't perfection, it's flexibility. A sculptor doesn't blame the marble for being hard. They adjust their tools to reveal the form hidden inside. Your mind works the same way. Epictetus, who began life as a slave and became one of history's wisest teachers, left us a simple yet revolutionary idea. No one is free who is not master of themselves. That's the thread connecting all 20 approaches. Not control over externals, but sovereignty over your own judgments, reactions, and values. It's the difference between being a leaf blown by every passing breeze and the tree that remains rooted while letting the wind rustle its leaves. Now here's your challenge. Don't try to overhaul your mindset overnight. Pick one practice, just one, to experiment with this week. Maybe it's pausing before reacting to criticism, or spending 10 minutes in undistracted solitude each morning. Observe what shifts when you redirect your energy from seeking approval to cultivating self-possession. And when you notice a breakthrough, when you catch yourself shrugging off a snide comment or feeling genuinely unshaken by someone's indifference, share it in the comments. Your story might be the nudge someone else needs to start their own Stoic journey. Because here's the beautiful truth these ancient practices reveal. Freedom isn't found in the absence of judgment, but in the quiet certainty that no judgment has the power to define you. That's the gift Stoicism offers, not a life without storms, but an unshakable anchor in the midst of them. The waves will keep coming, but now you know how to